Welcome to New Life NDE. Today, we bring you Ibrahim's transformative story, a near-death experience that completely changed his life. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow incredible stories like this one. Let's get started. My name is Ibrahim. I was born in a small village nestled in the Nile Delta, a place where the river whispered through our fields and life moved with the steady rhythm of prayer. For most of my life, I carried the identity of a faithful servant of God, a man who lived for his community and his family. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the surface, I was a man haunted by questions I dared not speak aloud. I immigrated to the United States nearly 2 decades ago, seeking better opportunities for my family. After years of hard work and sacrifice, I became the spiritual leader of a modest mosque in a Texan suburb. It was a role I cherished, or so I thought. My days were spent offering sermons, counseling congregants, and leading prayers. My evenings were reserved for my wife, Layla, and our 2 children, Yusuf and Miriam. From the outside, my life seemed perfectly balanced, a respected leader by day and a loving father by night. Yet, in the quiet moments, a sense of emptiness crept in. Every call to prayer, every heartfelt sermon felt increasingly mechanical. I would smile at the mosque members, but inside, I was hollow. Even my prayers, the moments that once anchored my soul, felt like a recitation rather than communion with God. I convinced myself this was normal, a phase, perhaps a test of faith. One evening, as I prepared my notes for the Friday sermon, Layla noticed my distant gaze. "Ibrahim," she asked softly, "are you okay? You seem tired." I forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind," I replied, brushing off her concern. Looking back, I realized that even then, God was whispering to me, calling me to wake from my spiritual slumber, but I was too caught up in the routine to hear it. Little did I know, my life was about to change in a way I could never have imagined. The feeling of emptiness didn't come all at once. It was a slow, creeping shadow that began to consume me over the years. I would wake up every morning with a heavy heart, a vague but persistent sense of unease. The responsibilities of my position as an imam were vast. Counseling congregants, settling disputes, teaching Quranic classes, but the satisfaction I once found in those acts began to wane. Even when the mosque was filled with faithful attendees, their voices echoing in unison during prayers, I often felt alone. My relationship with God had once been the core of my being, vibrant and alive, but now it felt distant, mechanical. I knew all the verses, all the teachings, but they had stopped touching my heart. Every prayer felt like going through the motions. I was giving sermons about faith and surrender, but inside, I felt like a fraud. I could see it in the faces of my family, too. Layla's eyes often lingered on me, her gaze a mixture of concern and unspoken questions. Yusuf, my teenage son, had started to pull away, sensing my distance. Miriam, still young and innocent, clung to me as though trying to bring back the father she once knew. One evening, after a long day at the mosque, I found myself sitting in my study, staring at the Quran open in front of me. The words blurred together. I wanted to feel something, anything, but my mind wandered. I asked myself, "Ibrahim, what's wrong with you? Where is your faith? Where is your passion?" But no answer came. The emptiness was not just spiritual, it was physical. My chest felt heavy, my thoughts were clouded, and my body ached as though burdened by an invisible weight. I wanted to escape the feeling, but I didn't know how. I kept telling myself, "This is a test. It will pass." I clung to that belief, even as doubt whispered otherwise. Little did I know, this inner turmoil was the prelude to a profound and terrifying awakening. The day it all changed began like any other. The Texas sun peeked through the blinds as I prepared for morning prayers. My wife, Layla, handed me a thermos of tea. "Drive safe, Ibrahim," she said, her voice soft but steady. I kissed her cheek and promised I'd be back by lunchtime. Little did I know, this would be a day neither of us would ever forget. As I drove toward the mosque, the air felt unusually heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional car passing by. I approached an intersection where the light had just turned green. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I saw a vehicle speeding toward me at an impossible rate. I barely had time to react. The sound of screeching tires and crunching metal filled my ears as the impact slammed into my side. In an instant, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my car. I wasn't even sure if I was alive. The world around me had shifted into something incomprehensible. I found myself floating above the scene of the accident, watching as bystanders gathered around the wreckage. My body lay limp in the driver's seat, paramedics frantically working to extract me. It was surreal, like watching a movie, yet I felt no pain, only an eerie calm. What is happening to me? I wondered aloud, though no sound came from my lips. I tried to move, but I had no physical form. I was weightless, untethered from the life I had known. Suddenly, I was pulled away from the accident scene by an invisible force. The world around me dissolved into darkness, a darkness so profound it felt alive. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of everything. I was alone in a void, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of my spiritual emptiness. The void was unlike anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just dark, it was suffocating, oppressive. I couldn't see, hear, or feel anything physical, but the weight of its emptiness pressed on me from every direction. Time seemed meaningless in this place. Moments stretched into eternity. It felt as if I had been severed from everything I knew. My family, my body, even God. I tried to cry out, but there was no voice. My thoughts echoed back at me, unanswered. Where am I? What is this place? Am I dead? The questions swirled in my mind, but the void swallowed them whole. There was no response, no sign, no flicker of light. Only the crushing realization that I was utterly alone. As I floated in this emptiness, memories from my life began to surface. My sermons, my prayers, my family, they all played like fragments of a broken film. I saw myself leading prayers at the mosque, my voice strong and commanding. Yet, in this void, I recognized something I had always ignored: the hollowness behind my words. I had preached about faith and devotion, but my own connection to God had been shallow. I had gone through the motions, fulfilling my duties out of obligation rather than love. The void seemed to magnify this truth, reflecting my inner emptiness like a mirror. A deep shame washed over me. I thought of Layla, Yusuf, and Miriam. How often had I been physically present but emotionally distant? How many times had I chosen my work over truly connecting with them? As despair threatened to overwhelm me, a faint light appeared in the distance. It was tiny, barely a flicker, but in the endless darkness, it was a beacon. I felt myself being drawn toward it, not by choice, but by an invisible force. Though fear gripped me, the light offered a sliver of hope. Perhaps this wasn't the end. Perhaps someone was waiting for me. As I was pulled toward the faint light, the darkness around me began to shift. The oppressive void gave way to something far more terrifying. In the distance, a cacophony of screams grew louder. It wasn't the kind of sound you hear with your ears. It reverberated within me, shaking my very soul. My fear deepened as I approached the source of the light, only to realize it wasn't salvation, it was fire. Before me stretched a massive chasm, glowing with an otherworldly, angry red. Flames leapt high, licking at the air with ferocity. Thick, Acrid smoke rose from the pit, carrying a stench so unbearable it felt like it was suffocating whatever spirit I had left. Within the fire, I saw figures writhing in torment. Some were chained, their faces contorted in agony. Others were tormented by grotesque beings, humanoid in form but with distorted, terrifying features. Their movements radiated malice, their actions driven by an unrelenting hunger to inflict pain. I stood at the edge of the abyss, frozen. Though I had no physical body, I felt a deep chill run through what remained of me. Among the tortured souls, faces began to emerge, faces I recognized. There was an old neighbor from my childhood, a man who had always seemed kind but had dismissed faith as unimportant. "Ibrahim!" he screamed, his voice piercing through the noise. I turned my back on God, and now there's no escape. Then I saw figures of renown, leaders, celebrities, people I had admired from a distance. One by one, they cried out their regrets, their voices mingling in a chorus of sorrow. I sacrificed everything for power. I lived a life of lies. Their confessions pierced through me, each one echoing my own buried fears. But it wasn't just those who had blatantly rejected faith. Among them were those who, like me, had lived lives of outward devotion but had neglected a true connection with God. Their hollow faith had led them to the same torment. The weight of realization was unbearable. I thought of my own prayers, my sermons, my service at the mosque. Had they been enough? Or had I, too, built a life of shallow faith? As I gazed into the pit, I felt something stir within me, a mix of fear and desperation. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. This place, this nightmare, felt like a warning. But who had sent it, and why? As I stood paralyzed at the edge of the fiery chasm, overwhelmed by the despair and regret emanating from the tormented souls, the light in the distance began to grow brighter. It pierced through the darkness, cutting through the oppressive weight of the abyss like a sword. The flames seemed to recoil from its presence, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. The light grew closer, and within it, a figure emerged. He radiated warmth and peace, his presence unlike anything I had ever known. Though I couldn't see his face clearly, I felt as though his gaze pierced through every layer of my being. His eyes, if eyes they were, carried an indescribable love and mercy. I knew immediately who he was, though I struggled to comprehend it. "Yeshua," I whispered, the name forming in my mind like a long-forgotten memory. "Ibrahim," he said, his voice both powerful and gentle, like a melody that soothed my soul. "You are loved, more than you could ever understand." Tears that I didn't know I could cry began to well up. I fell to my knees, or at least it felt that way, and poured out the anguish I had carried for so long. "I've failed," I said, my voice trembling. "I've failed as a leader, as a husband, as a father. My faith, it's been hollow." Yeshua knelt before me, his light enveloping me in a way that made the suffocating darkness vanish. "Your failures do not define you," he said, placing a hand over what I imagined to be my chest. "I see your heart, Ibrahim. I know your struggles, your doubts, your fears, but I am here to set you free." His touch was unlike anything I had felt before, warm, pure, and filled with love. The chains of regret and shame that had bound me began to fall away, clattering into the void. For the first time in years, I felt whole. "Why me?" I asked, barely able to form the words. "Why now?" "Because you are ready," Yeshua replied, his tone unwavering. "This is not the end, Ibrahim. It is a new beginning. Return and live your life with purpose, with love, and with a genuine connection to God." As his words resonated within me, the darkness dissolved completely. The fiery chasm disappeared, replaced by a radiant expanse of light. I felt myself being lifted, as though carried by unseen hands. I didn't understand everything, but I knew one thing for certain. I had been given a second chance. The light that had surrounded me began to fade, replaced by a dull, sterile glow. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the brightness of the fluorescent lights above me. My body felt heavy, like I was wrapped in layers of lead. Gradually, the sounds of the physical world returned, a faint beeping, muffled voices, and the rustling of movement. I realized I was lying in a hospital bed. "Ibrahim!" A voice called softly, trembling with emotion. I turned my head with effort and saw Layla. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was one of overwhelming relief. "You're awake?" she whispered, her voice cracking as she grasped my hand tightly. "You came back to us." Her words hit me with the force of a wave. Came back? What had happened? Memories of the accident flooded my mind. The speeding car, the crushing impact, and then everything else. The void, the fire, Yeshua. It all felt vivid and real, more real than the world I now found myself in. A doctor entered the room, his expression a mixture of astonishment and professionalism. "Mr. Ibrahim," he said, glancing at my chart, "you've been through something incredible. You were clinically dead for 9 minutes. It's nothing short of a miracle that you're here." 9 minutes. My heart raced as I recalled everything I had experienced in that timeless void. Those 9 minutes had felt like an eternity. I turned to Layla, who was still holding my hand as though afraid to let go. Her tears had begun to flow again, and I could see the weight of those moments etched on her face. "I thought we lost you," she said. "I prayed. We all prayed." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through me. Gratitude, fear, love, all swirling in a storm that I couldn't yet process. But amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. I had been given a second chance. Yeshua's words echoed in my mind, resonating like a divine command. This was not the end. It was a new beginning. The days that followed my awakening were a whirlwind of emotions. My body healed quickly, but my spirit felt heavier than ever. I knew I couldn't simply return to the life I had before. How could I, after what I had seen and experienced? But the question that haunted me most was, how could I explain this to anyone? Would they even believe me? At home, Layla watched me closely, her concern evident. "Ibrahim," she asked one evening as we sat in the quiet of our living room, "what happened to you? You're different. Even the children have noticed." Her words were both a comfort and a challenge. How could I begin to describe the indescribable? I reached for her hand and held it tightly. "Layla," I began, my voice trembling. "When I was gone, I saw something. No, I experienced something. It wasn't just an accident. I was shown another reality." Her eyes widened, searching mine for answers. "Another reality? Ibrahim, what are you saying?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The void, the visions of torment, the encounter with Yeshua. As I spoke, tears streamed down my face, and I could see the shock and confusion in hers. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "You're saying," she began hesitantly, "that you saw Jesus?" I nodded, unsure of how she would respond. "Yes, Layla. He saved me. He showed me the truth. I've been living a life of outward faith, but inside, I was lost." She sat back, her expression unreadable. "Ibrahim, this is a lot. You've been through so much, and maybe this is just your mind trying to make sense of it all." Her words stung, but I couldn't blame her. I barely understood it myself. Still, the truth burned within me, undeniable. Over the next few weeks, I found myself drawn to the Bible, reading it with a hunger I couldn't explain. I searched for answers, for clarity, and with each verse, Yeshua's message of love and grace became clearer. At the mosque, my duties felt like a heavy mask I could no longer bear to wear. Leading prayers and delivering sermons became excruciating. Each word I spoke felt hollow, a betrayal of the truth I now carried. My congregants noticed the change, their whispered concerns reaching my ears. "Is Imam Ibrahim okay? He seems distant." I wrestled with my identity, caught between the man I had been and the man I was becoming. The thought of leaving my role as an imam terrified me, but I knew deep down that I couldn't continue living this way. My heart was no longer in it. Late one night, as I sat alone in my study, I prayed, not out of obligation, but out of desperation. "God," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, "what do I do? How do I move forward?" The answer didn't come as a voice or a vision, but as a quiet certainty that settled over me. I needed to let go of my old life to fully embrace the new path before me. The decision to step away from my role as an imam was not one I made lightly. For weeks, I carried the weight of it, praying for guidance and wrestling with my fears. The community had trusted me for years, and I knew the shock and disappointment my departure might cause. But the truth was undeniable. I could no longer lead with a heart that had been transformed by something so profound, something I could not ignore. Before I made the announcement, I turned my attention to my family. They had been the anchor in my life, though I had taken them for granted far too often. I began spending more time with Layla, sitting with her after the children had gone to bed, sharing my thoughts, my struggles, and my fears. She was hesitant at first, unsure of how to reconcile the man she had married with the man I was becoming. But as the days passed, I saw her resistance soften. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she placed her hand over mine. "I don't fully understand what you've been through, Ibrahim," she said softly, "but I see the change in you. It's real, and I see how much love you have for us now. That's enough for me." Her words were a balm to my soul. I hugged her tightly, feeling gratitude well up in me like never before. With her support, I began to mend the distance I had created with our children. Yusuf, my teenage son, had grown skeptical of me over the years, his quiet defiance a reflection of the distance between us. I started making an effort to connect with him, not as a teacher or a disciplinarian, but as a father. We would take walks, play soccer in the yard, and talk about his dreams and fears. Slowly, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. Miriam, still young and tender-hearted, accepted me without question. Her innocent love was a reminder of the simplicity and purity of faith, a gift I had overlooked for so long. I made a point to read to her every night, weaving stories of love and redemption that reflected my newfound understanding of God's grace. Through these small acts, I rediscovered the joy of being present, of loving without expectation. My family became my first ministry, and their love and acceptance strengthened me for the journey ahead. The morning I stepped down as an imam was one of the most difficult of my life. I stood before my congregation, the people who had trusted me for years, and struggled to find the words. The mosque was silent as I began, my voice trembling. "My brothers and sisters," I said, "I have served you with all that I could, but my heart has been called to a new path, one that requires me to step away from this role." There were murmurs, a few shocked gasps, and a flood of emotions reflected in their faces: confusion, hurt, and even anger. I spoke from my heart, sharing as much as I felt they could understand. "I have experienced something profound," I continued, "something that has shown me the importance of living with a true, deep connection to God, one that is more than rituals and routines." Some nodded, their expressions softening, while others remained rigid, their disbelief palpable. When I stepped down from the podium, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but it was replaced by the daunting reality of what lay ahead. I was no longer an imam, but I was not yet certain who I was meant to be. In the months that followed, I devoted myself to understanding the message Yeshua had shown me. I immersed myself in the Bible, letting its teachings reshape my perspective on faith, love, and redemption. My days were filled with prayer, not out of obligation, but from a place of gratitude and connection. My worship was no longer confined to a mosque. It became a part of every moment, a dialogue with the Creator. Word of my transformation spread, and while some in the community distanced themselves from me, others were drawn by curiosity and a longing for the peace they saw in me. I began meeting with people one-on-one, sharing my story, listening to theirs, and offering them the same love and grace I had received. One day, as I sat on a park bench reflecting on how far I had come, Yusuf joined me. He had grown taller in the past few months, his once rebellious demeanor replaced by a quiet strength. "Dad," he said, looking at me with a mix of admiration and curiosity, "do you think people can really change?" I smiled, my heart swelling with pride and love. "Yes, Yusuf," I replied, "people can change. I'm living proof of that. But real change doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within, from truly opening your heart to God's love." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful, and I knew then that my transformation was already planting seeds in the lives of those around me. My mission became clear: to live as a testament to the boundless love and grace I had experienced, to be a light for those searching for something deeper. It wasn't just about sharing a message, it was about embodying it every day, in every interaction. This was my new journey, a life of renewal, surrender, and purpose. And for the first time, I truly felt free. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and watch this next story. It's truly emotional.